Chapter 16. Former PSY counselor and once leader of the Arrow Squad, Ming Leben needed to be part of the Trinity Accord, not just for informational purposes but because he might otherwise miss out on lucrative business opportunities. Unlike with Nikita Duncan, business didn't occupy the central role in Ming's personal hierarchy of importance, but he'd long ago learned that money was power. Since the Wolves and the Squad would certainly block his application to sign the accord, he'd have to get in via a majority, so he'd play politics. He would far rather use fear to achieve his aims, but that could backfire in this situation. No, it was better if he began making contact with smaller groups and flattering them with his interest. He'd also sound out a number of large Psi corporations who couldn't be as happy about the accord as they appeared to be in public. Together they'd ensure Ming's application to sign Trinity was a success. Of course, he'd then figure out how to take control of the cooperation agreement and use it to his advantage. The Trinity Accord was too potentially influential to be left in hands that had no experience with wielding that kind of power. Chapter 17. I think Lucas and Hawk should do the tango to open the party. Yes. P.S. Update on pup cubs. I am still 14 months pregnant. Sasha stifled a laugh as she replied to Mercy's message from her curled-up position in an armchair in a corner of Lucas's private office at DarkRiver's Chinatown HQ. He had a much sleeker public office on another floor, but this was the hub of the HQ. What's the smile for? Lucas glanced over from where he stood in front of a comm screen, having just finalized the details of a new business project DarkRiver was entering into with a large Psi family group. Sasha read out the message. I'm voting yes to the tango, she added. I want to see you and Hawk cheek to cheek. Lucas's scowl was very alpha. She needs to give birth so she can stop being bored and making trouble. I think she'd agree with you. In her last update, Mercy had written, think belly button has popped off. May have to fashion new one out of a donut hole. Lucas turned back to the comm as it chimed an incoming call. Black Sea, he murmured to her before touching the screen to answer. The woman who'd made the call had sharp cheekbones, her flawless skin a shade that, Sasha suddenly thought, wouldn't have looked out of place in any Psi family. Psi and silence had a clinical way of mixing and mingling genes to the family's psychic advantage, until skin shades on either end of the spectrum were less common than those in between. According to Riaz, one of the Snowdancer lieutenants who most often dealt with Black Sea, Miena was the product of a devoted mating between an Egyptian father and an Algerian mother. The result was a striking, powerful woman. Her straight black hair was cut in a blunt fringe over slightly up-tilted eyes that were currently a translucent hazel. However, Sasha had seen those irises turn obsidian. It shouldn't have disconcerted her. Not when Psi eyes could go fully black. But the blackness in Miena's eyes. It was as dark as the deepest part of the ocean, a whispering echo of a more primal time. Lucas. The Black Sea Alpha's tone was cool, but Sasha sensed boiling tension beneath the skin. As an empath, she couldn't technically feel a person's emotional resonance from this far a distance, but technicalities weren't everything. It was her belief that empaths learned fine emotional cues without knowing it. Sasha had discussed that with Ivy Jane and with young Toby. Both agreed, though Toby had put it a different way. Since we know about emotions all the time, I guess we get used to separating out all the types. Like changelings can with scent. An astute comment from an astute boy. Miena, Lucas responded while Sasha stayed out of the shot. Tanique's info give you any leads? A shake of Miena's head. We focused on Canada because we have to start somewhere, but so far nothing's panned out. We're here to assist if you need it. Black Sea's Alpha nodded before moving on to the reason for her call. I just spoke to Aiden Kai. He suggested I attend a Trinity Summit in 2 hours with the head of a Psi family plus a couple of Human Alliance CEOs. All three have interests in coastal areas that touch our waters. You wondering why the short notice? Kai says it's to stop the chance of a violent disruption, and that I'm getting an hour's extra notice because it'll take me longer to reach the location of the meeting. But while I'm predisposed to like the Arrows, I'm well aware they have motives and aims of their own, not all of which align with Black Sea's. Dark River, meanwhile, Sasha realized was an official ally. Changelings didn't make such pronouncements lightly. It's legit. Lucas braced his hands on his hips, the fine cotton of his white shirt stretching over his biceps. I'd take the usual precautions regardless. We don't know the motives of all parties who've signed the accord. Miena logged off with a curt nod and no goodbye. Watching her mate use the comm screen to deal with a quick contract update, Sasha wondered if Lucas knew he was becoming a powerful figure worldwide. Likely not. Such thoughts would go against his pack-minded nature. He'd never pursued power for power's sake and never would. But as Miena had just demonstrated, Lucas had come to be considered worthy of trust by an influential network of changelings. Another call came in just as he finished up what he'd been doing and went to turn toward Sasha. She caught his raised eyebrow. "Jin Liu and I don't have a scheduled call today." It turned out the matriarch of the Liu family group wanted his feedback on a changeling pack that was pitching for business with Liu. "Our contacts in that area are regrettably thin," said the silver-haired woman with a sharp, pointed face. "I'm not requesting private data. I simply wish to know if they're reputable in a business sense." "Very," Lucas replied. "They're small, but if they take on a project and you don't get in their way once the plans are finalized, they'll finish it on time and within budget." "Thank you. Should you require similar feedback on a Psi company, feel free to contact me." That was when Sasha realized Lucas wasn't only trusted by changelings across the world, but that he was gaining a reputation among Psi as well. "Naya," she whispered, understanding settling on her shoulders like a warm blanket. Her mate sent her a questioning look. "Changeling and Psi," she said. "They both know that of all involved parties, you alone would never jeopardize Trinity. We have a child who needs to grow up in a united world." Her mate's eyes were suddenly more panther than human. "A fair evaluation, isn't it, kitten?" "Yes." She uncurled her legs from the armchair and got up to walk to him, wrapping her arms around his waist as they stood face to face. "You don't mind that they know?" Head inclined to meet her gaze, Lucas shook his head. "Not if this is the consequence. If people trust me, they trust in Trinity by default." An inquisitive mental touch across Sasha's mind. Naya's having fun with Clay. The quietest of the sentinels was one of Naya's favorite people. She would snuggle up against his shoulder and watch wide-eyed while he moved around, no matter what he was doing, and unusually for Naya, she didn't demand to be put down so she could explore on her own. Clay said it was because he had experience with little girls, thanks to his adopted daughter Noor. His mate Talon had a different take on it. "He's always had a marshmallow heart," the tawny-haired woman had teased one day while he was cuddling Noor in one arm and holding Naya in the other. "He used to attend tea parties with me when we were kids. He even drank the pretend tea, and told me it was delicious." Clay had glowered at the woman he called Tally. "Wait till I have my hands free." His glower should have been terrifying. Clay was a seriously dangerous leopard. But Noor had growled and pretended to maul Clay, setting off Naya, who'd burst into hysterical baby laughter that had in turn set off both Sasha and Talon. Clay's grin had creased his cheeks, the once angrily silent sentinel now a man deeply at peace and delighted with his life. Smiling at the memory, Sasha responded to Naya's telepathic touch with a psychic kiss. "Here I am, sweetheart." "I've been thinking that Naya should meet Nikita," Lucas said at almost the same time. Sasha's mouth fell open. "You don't even like her." Nikita had been part of a machine that had crushed countless changelings under its boot, had in fact been a member of the organization that had consciously hidden the worst serial killers on the planet. That action had led to the deaths of hundreds, including that of Dorian's younger sister, a loss that had devastated the Sentinel and enraged Lucas. Snowdancer had almost lost Brenna to the same murderous psychopath. "I might not like her," Lucas said, "but she kept you alive in difficult circumstances and she's Naya's grandmother." He ran his thumb over her cheekbone, tactile as always. Sasha never had to wonder about Lucas's love for her, either on the emotional or on the physical plane. Neither did she have to worry about being touch-hungry ever again, as she'd been for so many years of her life. "Still," she said, trying to make sense of his suggestion and failing, "to trust her with access to Naya?" Her mate's expression grew dark. "I'd rather Naya know her from childhood than that she grow up curious about her. Curious cubs have a way of getting into trouble." Sasha couldn't argue with that. She'd seen exactly how much trouble Dark River teens could get into. A teenager curious about her powerful lethal grandmother had the potential to get into more dangerous trouble than most. "I don't think Nikita would ever hurt her," she said, placing her hand on the taut muscle of Lucas's arm. "I agree," he said. "Otherwise, feline curiosity or not, I wouldn't let her within 100 feet of our child." Sliding one of his hands up to curve it around her neck, he locked his gaze with her own. "If we do it, it has to be soon. Nikita's still weak from the assassination attempt. Her defenses down. Naya might actually get to meet the woman beneath the mask." Unlike the panther who was her mate, Sasha's empathic heart wasn't used to thinking with such pitiless pragmatism, but she knew Lucas was right. They had to bring Naya and Nikita into contact while there was a chance Nikita would bond with their baby. Because once Sasha's mother bonded with a child, she'd fight to the death to protect that vulnerable life. Sasha had understood that only after she was out of the Psi net. "I'll work out a time with Sophie," she said. "We'll make sure Nikita doesn't know so she can't prepare." Nikita's most senior and trusted aide, Sophia Russo, was very much her own woman and she would defy Nikita if she thought it good for her boss. Sophia still worried about how hard Nikita is driving herself? Nodding, Sasha said. At least Anthony's keeping an eye on her. If anyone can make my mother rest, I'd say it's him. Quite aside from whatever it was that was going on with Nikita, and the head of Clan Nightstar, Sasha knew Nikita respected Anthony. Faith's father is a brave, brave man. Lucas's solemn pronouncement made her lips twitch and her mind stop tugging at the thread of worry that was concern for the mother who'd abandoned her. And saved her. If their shields weren't so airtight, she admitted in a guilty whisper, I'd probably slip up in the ethics department and take a peek at their emotions. Panther green eyes glinted in approval. You and everyone else who knows about those two, I bet. A nibbling kiss that was pure teasing cat. I'll reach out to Vasich, he said afterward. See if he'll agree to teleport you. Sasha nodded, aware she and Naya couldn't be seen entering Nikita's domain. If Vasich can't do it, we'll have to come up with another plan. Mother won't accept any other teleporter in her domain while she's weak. Vasich is an arrow, Lucas pointed out. Dangerous as they come. He's also bonded to an E. Nikita considered empaths weak in their emotionality, but she also accepted that they were good judges of character. Plus, Lucas said, eyes narrowed in thought, Aiden's made it clear the arrows don't want to stage a coup. That has to factor into her decisions. Sasha had a sudden thought. What if Anthony's with her when I go in? She whispered, her mind flicking back to the hospital waiting room and Anthony's silent, intense presence. Lucas paused in the act of unbuttoning his shirt to change into his preferred t-shirt and jeans now that he was about to head out of the office. Anyone who called him while he was in the field would get the changeling alpha as opposed to the CEO of DarkRiver. It was a fine distinction and it kept people on their toes now that DarkRiver was no longer in danger of being dismissed as a small, unimportant pack. An arrested expression on his face, he said. If he is. A very wicked, very feline smile. I'm all for interrupting them and relieving our curiosity about what exactly they get up to behind closed doors. Sasha's shoulders shook, her worry about her mother overtaken by delight that Nikita might be doing something with Anthony. No matter how unlikely that was, given the individuals involved. Any relationship Anthony and Nikita had would never be predictable or understood by others. You're such a cat sometimes. Meow. Laughing, she ducked out of his office before she gave in to the urge to pet him, because it wouldn't stop there. Then their packmates would catch them and never let it go. Instead, she went looking for their cub. Naya's animated voice announced her presence well before Sasha saw her. She was still with Clay, who was checking construction specs on a comm screen. Far from demanding attention, Naya was happily hanging over his shoulder and talking to Dorian as the other sentinel worked at a drafting board behind Clay. Another, smaller baby, only a few months old, lay in a plush capsule carrier on the desk next to Dorian. This one was peacefully asleep, all dark lashes and plump cheeks. She was dressed in white socks and a pink one-piece with a daisy print on the front. Tied gently around her head, over a shock of silky dark hair, was a white ribbon. Sasha just wanted to pick her up and cuddle her close. Is that right? Dorian said to Naya, drawing a line using the old-fashioned set square. He preferred over more high-tech tools when it came to his architectural work. His white blonde hair was bright in the sunshine pouring through the casement windows on this level of the mid-size building. The open-plan area maximizing the space and light. You don't say. Glancing at the sleeping baby at the same time that he responded to Naya, Dorian reached out and touched the tip of the baby's nose. She smiled in her sleep and seemed to settle even deeper. Yes, Dorian said when Naya talked to him some more. Included was the word door several times. Naya definitely knew her packmates. This is Mielin Karina, Dorian said, as if he'd fully understood Naya's question. She belongs to Rhea and Emmett. You can play with her when she gets a little bigger. Sasha leaned against a wall of the workspace and just watched the four of them. She wasn't the least surprised when Lucas's executive administrative assistant, Rhea, came to stand beside her. Shaking her head, the shorter woman said, I swear these guys make my ovaries explode. It's even worse when it's your own mate, isn't it? Oh God, yes. Rhea sighed, her brown eyes warm with love as they lingered on her baby. Emmett does this thing where he tells her stories while cuddling her to sleep. My heart goes boom every single time. I have zero willpower for hours afterward. The man could ask me to dance naked while playing bongo drums and I'd do it. Sasha nodded in sympathy. The first time I walked into the room and saw Naya asleep on Lucas's chest while he slept too, his hand over her naked baby butt. Sasha sighed, rubbing a fist over her heart. I don't think I've recovered. Even just thinking of Emmett with our baby. Rhea sniffed, her lower lip quivering. Sasha wrapped an arm around the normally tough-as-nails woman. I know. She dropped a kiss on Rhea's mink-brown hair. At home with the affectionate skin privileges permitted to packmates who were close. Your ovaries will learn to take it. Rhea sniffle laughed. Hearing the sound, Dorian glanced over. Hey now. The handsome male who'd been full of pitiless anger and grief when Sasha first met him, walked over to tug Rhea from Sasha's embrace and wrap her in his arms. I thought your eyes only shot fire. Rhea punched him in the arm. It had zero effect since he was built of pure muscle. Chuckling, the sentinel kissed her cheek. You have the specs I asked for? Here. Rhea pushed the organizer into his chest, but without any force. How much did you corrupt my daughter today? She's definitely going to have a thing for blonde architects when she grows up, Dorian said with a heartbreaker grin. Going over to her cub, Rhea kissed Mylan's chubby cheeks, brushed back the baby-fine hair that had escaped from under the ribbon, and just beamed. Look at her, such an angel. She turned to Naya, took Sasha's baby's face in her hands, and smothered her in kisses. Naya giggled and kissed her back. Your friend Mylan saves her bad behavior for 3 a.m, she said with another smacking kiss before turning to Dorian. Amidst bringing my grandmother over in an hour to pick up our cub for a little great-grandma-granddaughter time. Oh man, Dorian complained. We only got her for a few hours. Today. Rhea poked him in the gut. Watching her packmates and the 2 cubs in the sunshine, Sasha felt no fear, only a fierce determination to keep them safe. Anyone who tried to hurt DarkRiver's young would end up mauled bloody. Even an empath had a breaking point, push her too far and she'd hit back hard. The world thought it knew yes and what they could do. It didn't. Having left his mate and child at the city HQ, Sasha working from his office while Naya played happily with her friends in the nursery downstairs, Lucas spent the second half of the day at a construction site with Dorian and Clay. He and the 2 sentinels had just finished their discussions when Clay got a phone call. The other man made a motion with his hand for Lucas to remain as he finished the call. T-Jan, he said after hanging up. Rats picked up a whiff of something, signs of mercenaries coming into the general area. Lucas's eyes narrowed. What kind of mercenaries? Good enough that the rats are having trouble getting any kind of a lock on them. All they have are whispers in the African community in the city. Clay folded his arms, his muscles taut under the gleaming mahogany of his skin. The community's scared of whoever these people are, and they're pro-DarkRiver enough to pass on any intel they have, but they don't seem to know much more than that the group's called Death Mask. Taking off the bright yellow safety helmet he'd been wearing, Dorian thrust a hand through his sweat-damp hair. Good name if you want to intimidate people. It seems like in this case the name fits. Clay's jaw was a brutal line. According to Tyjan's research, no one's ever caught them, but they're rumored to be responsible for massacres and kidnappings across most of the African continent. Lucas's mind went immediately to the threatening chatter about Naya, but he knew the mercenaries could be here for 100 different reasons, including picking off Lucas or Hawk or even Nikita. Any point hacking into enforcement databases? It was Dorian who replied. If the rats are this much in the dark, enforcement will have no idea these fuckers are even in the city. The sentinel's vivid blue gaze grew grim. But whatever's going to happen, it'll be soon. We all know groups like this don't come into an area unless they're setting up to strike. Letters to Nina. From the personal diaries of Father Xavier Perez. March 23, 2074. Just past midnight. Nina. I didn't kill the man, the sigh. I had a gun, planned to shoot him without warning because that's the only way you can surprise an elite soldier. But when I would have pulled out the gun in the alley behind the bar, my hand froze in my pocket. It wasn't fear, wasn't cold feet. It was telekinesis. As I watched him walk toward me, I thought he was coming to kill me, and I'm ashamed to admit I felt relief. Finally, no more pain, no more hurt, no more seeing you jump into the water over and over again. But when he reached me, the man didn't kill me. He said, if you shoot me, you'll be acting against your own interests. I'm here to stop another massacre. I laughed at him, but he challenged me to come with him. Or would you rather drown in alcohol? His words cut me. To be judged by a Psy assassin? No. I'm going with this Psy soldier, this man who walks like a killer. Chapter 18. 1 day passed. 2. 3. On the 4th, when nothing suspicious happened and the rats reported no new whispers about Death Mask, DarkRiver didn't stand down its alert, but it began to consider whether the mercenaries had simply been passing through on their way elsewhere. Sasha hadn't stopped living her life in the interim, but she had kept Naya in Yosemite, deep in the heart of the Pack's territory. However, that couldn't continue forever. Her cub was missing her friends at the nursery attached to DarkRiver HQ. So Lucas had brought her in this morning. Now, at just after 1:30, Sasha was picking her up and driving them back home so the two of them could go visit Mercy. They were in an armored vehicle that didn't even pretend to be anything but a protective tank. None of DarkRiver's children would travel in anything but these for the foreseeable future. The entire fleet had been checked by mechanics when the Arrows first reported the ugly things being said about Naya. The vehicles were then assigned to families who needed to move in and out of the city. Often they carpooled, but today Naya and Sasha had the vehicle to themselves. She pulled away from DarkRiver HQ's parking lot with a wave at Lucas, who stood only a short distance away, having walked her and Naya outside. He blew her a kiss, then bent and blew one to Naya. Their baby was safely ensconced and back in her special car seat that protected her while giving her a view out the windows and a clear line of sight to Sasha. Sasha could hear Naya making kissing sounds as she blew kisses noisily back. Bye, Papa. Bye, Papa. That kept her busy as Sasha merged into traffic. She wasn't alone, of course. Dorian was in a rugged Jeep behind her, his task to escort her and Naya home. DarkRiver had made the decision not to put everyone in the same vehicle when an escort was needed. A second vehicle made it harder for anyone to mount an effective ambush, plus it put two different sets of eyes on the road at different points. Flashing her rear lights to acknowledge the sentinel, she smiled when he flashed his headlights in return. Then she focused on the road and on keeping Naya safe as they drove home. She'd made this journey countless times, but she never took anything for granted. Still, she had her favorite sections. Look at the trees, Naya, she said as they passed through the Presidio. Those are eucalyptus trees. Eutis. Yes, eucalyptus. It was so easy to praise her child, to make her happy. She'd never understand how mothers under silence had been able to shut down that violently powerful maternal urge. Do you know which animals eat eucalyptus leaves? Keela. Sasha laughed, well aware there was a good chance Naya didn't fully understand their discussion. But her baby knew the answer after the number of times they'd passed this way, and she got just as excited every single time. Good girl, Sasha said. Koalas eat eucalyptus leaves. As she drove, she told Naya about the marsupials and how they carried their babies in a pouch. Naya's mental pattern was happy in Sasha's mind, her baby finding pleasure in listening to her mother's voice. When Sasha ran out of koala facts, she told Naya about the upcoming DarkRiver Snow Dancer event. A few more minutes and she knew her cub would nod off. It was good timing. The nap would leave her energetic and active for the visit to Mercy and Riley's. They just passed a private driveway without incident, the curving street ahead empty of traffic, when a large truck fitted with a heavy metal bull bar roared out from that drive at high speed. It was aimed straight at Dorian's Jeep. The Sentinel managed to avoid a full-on collision with a lightning-fast turn, but it wasn't enough. The truck smashed into the back half of the Jeep at full speed, crumpling the powerful frame and causing Dorian's vehicle to flip onto its side. The metal screamed as the truck's momentum shoved it across the tarmac, sparks shooting out from the contact, just as a bigger armored truck roared out at Sasha from the other direction. The gleaming black vehicle screeched to a stop across the road, blocking Sasha's path. She'd instinctively braked when she saw what had happened to Dorian. Now she came to a full stop. Anything else and she'd have smashed into the armored truck in her way. An armored truck that held people who wanted to hurt her baby, who had already hurt Dorian. A strange calm descended on her. No, she said. Mama. It's all right, Naya. Mama needs you to be quiet and to hold your shields tight for a second. Even as she spoke, she was watching the doors of the truck in front of her shove open. Masked men and women in camouflage gear running out with their weapons trained on Sasha's vehicle. Okay, sweetheart? She reiterated her order with a psychic visual. You understand? K. Sasha felt Naya concentrating as hard as possible on maintaining her fragile new shields. They wouldn't hold against even a weak adult telepath, but it was another small protection. Sasha had already locked her own defenses around her child, while gently blocking Naya's ability to feel what Sasha was about to do. Naya didn't need to know that thanks to all the developments made by empaths working together as a group, her loving empath mother had figured out how to weaponize her ability. And she'd learned how to do it against all races, including the Psi mind that was currently trying to batter down her shields. It didn't matter that she had no pre-existing psychic connection to any of her targets. Maybe it had been inevitable that Sasha would be the one to figure it out. After all, not only had she been out of the Psi net the longest, she lived surrounded by non-Psi minds who trusted her enough to act as her guinea pigs. And critically, she was connected to not one but multiple non-Psi minds. Wary of giving enemies in the net a tool against humans and changelings, she'd shared her discovery only with 4 other empaths, all of whom she trusted beyond any question. None, including a fellow cardinal, had been able to repeat her success outside of the Psi race. The others could help humans and changelings in emotional pain by taking away or reducing that pain, but as soon as they tried anything aggressive, nothing happened. They simply couldn't tune into the right frequency, which was the best way Sasha had found to describe what she did when she used her ability to affect non-psi minds. It made no difference whether the mind was human, and thus usually vulnerable to psi interference, or changeling, and therefore generally invulnerable to the same types of interference. We can't even sense the frequency, Ivy Jane had said to her. When I try, I get that horrible pain I felt when I was trying to impact people without using the psi net. The others had concurred. It had been Sweet Jaya who'd said, "You figured this out after you had a baby. Maybe it's that bond that gives you the ability." A frown. It could be her brain that's allowing you to find the non-psi frequency. Once she grows up and the mother-child bond morphs into the mother-adult-child one, it may disappear. It was as good a theory as any, but right now Sasha cared only that she could hurt the people, psi, changeling, or human, who wanted to hurt her baby. It had been difficult for her to teach herself to do something that went against her every empathic instinct, but she'd promised herself she'd only ever use that aspect of her ability when there was no other choice, and to do nothing would be to let evil win. Door. Naya's sudden agitation had her twisting in her car seat, as if trying to see Dorian. Mama, Dor. Don't worry, baby. Dorian is strong. He's going to be fine. The sentinel was alive. She could feel it through the web of stars, the same way Naya had realized something was wrong. His star was flickering on the psychic network formed by blood bonds with a pack alpha. But not badly, because Lucas was pouring energy into the wounded sentinel. Changelings didn't know they did that, but Sasha could see it clear as day. Lucas's bond with his sentinel had woken in a golden blaze the instant Dorian was hurt. Already Lucas would be tracking Dorian's vehicle, trying to contact him. He'd call it an instinctive awareness. Sasha knew it was an unconscious psychic link. Different from those made by the psi, but a psychic link nonetheless. Lucas would also already be attempting to contact Sasha, but her phone was buried in the bottom of her handbag, and she'd pushed mute on the car's mobile comm the instant the car came to a halt. She couldn't risk an interruption to her concentration. She also couldn't split her energies enough to reassure Lucas through the mating bond. He'd understand. After this was over, he'd know why she'd done what she had. All those thoughts passed through her mind in the split seconds it took her to calibrate it to send out a crippling wave of horror and terror. A concentrated dose of the worst nightmares given potent form. In front of her car, the assault team fell almost as one, their weapons lying unheeded around them as they curled up and screamed, their hands at their ears in a futile attempt to block the empathic pulse. Two turned over onto their sides and vomited. It was just as well that Naya wasn't tall enough to see through the windscreen. Sasha had already opaqued the window next to Naya. She'd also blocked a large percentage of her baby's audio channels, leaving only enough that Naya wouldn't be scared and could still hear her mother. Now she turned to smile at her child while actually looking out through the back window to see if Dorian was still trapped inside his vehicle. The doors of the truck that had hit him were open. One man lay crumpled by the driver's side door, while others lay on the road between her car and the truck. They'd planned to box her in on every side. She didn't really care about their plans. Her attention was on Dorian, because the sentinel had managed to climb out of his mangled jeep. He was limping badly but was mobile. Stopping partway on his walk to her, he lifted what looked like a phone to his ear. When her phone rang heartbeats later, the sound dull, she snatched up the handbag she'd left on the passenger seat and dug through it with frantic hands. There. Dorian, are you okay? Naya gave a big sigh of relief. Dory. Focused on the sentinel as she was, Sasha felt the deep stab of pain that pulsed through Dorian as her cub's innocent cry traveled through the line. Sasha. His voice was gritty. Yes. Can you shield me? Her eyes widened. How are you still standing? She immediately pushed a shield around his mind to block out her own broadcast. I was hoping you were too far away, and that he'd forgive her if he caught the edge of it. She'd had to make certain she caught the assailants in the truck so they couldn't hurt him while he was pinned down. I knew it was you, Dorian said, and voice suddenly far less strained, gave her a wave. And it was nothing like what these fuckers are apparently feeling. I'm guessing the fact you're connected to me through our web has something to do with it. I'll come. No, stay inside the car. Keep the squirt company and tell her Dory says hello. As she watched, he nudged a fallen assailant with the foot of his injured leg. These bastards are all down and fucked. He sounded pleased by that. How long can you keep it up? Should I incapacitate? He had a gun in hand, aimed it at a pair of kneecaps as she watched. Sweat broke out over Sasha's spine as she thought about what she'd done and what Dorian was asking her. But she had to see this through. The threat to Naya and to Dorian remained. I can keep it up until help arrives. It was the first burst that took the most energy, though she couldn't keep up the pulse forever, or even an hour. She knew she wouldn't need to. Is Lucas on his way? Yes, Dorian replied, with half the pack, from every direction. That proved to not be too much of an exaggeration. First, however, came multiple humans who lived in the area and who wanted to render assistance. They'd staggered out despite catching the edge of Sasha's blast. When she quickly pulled back the radius, belatedly realizing the extent of her reach, they ran inside their homes and raced back out with rope to help tie up the assault team. Afterward, Sasha heard that those humans had begun calling into Dark River the instant they'd seen the deliberate collision. At that point, they hadn't even realized the man inside the crushed vehicle was a leopard. They'd simply seen danger and reached for Dark River. It said a lot about what the pack had become to this city. The human residents had helped tie up 3 of the downed attackers when Dark River descended on the scene. So did Drew and Indigo. The snowdancer couple had been in the city when they'd received the emergency alert through Dark River's network of local contacts. Tijen also arrived on a high-speed jet cycle, as did Max Shannon. Sasha hadn't even known the ex-cop, and Sophia Russo's husband, was in the alert network, though she should have. He was Nikita's security chief, and for all Nikita's flaws, she'd already proven she'd protect her child and grandchild. We're fine. She scrambled out of the car when Lucas ran to them. She'd stayed locked inside until then, both so Dorian wouldn't worry when he had other matters to handle, and so she could keep tailoring her broadcast to keep it clear of any rescuers. We're fine, she repeated as his arms locked around her. Naya. She didn't hear or see anything. Just got a little worried about Dorian. Her heart thumped against her rib cage, her body starting to shake. He's hurt. Jason's doing some first aid. Pulling back so he could scan her for injuries, Lucas said. After that, he'll take Dorian straight to an ER for deep scans to ensure there are no internal injuries. Tamsin's been alerted. Papa. Lucas flexed his fisted hand and took a deep, steadying breath. Then, one hand firm around Sasha's, he leaned down to smile at Naya through the open driver's side door. Hello, princess. What are you doing? I thought you were heading home. Naya's response was earnest and largely incomprehensible. Yes, Lucas said, clearly responding more to her tone than her words. Papa's going to take care of it. Don't worry. Naya smiled. Lucas reached in and over to tap her on the nose before rising to his full height beside the car again. I'll drive you home. It was a growl, his panther prowling behind his eyes. Don't argue, all right? I won't. Sasha's throat was dry. Her muscles felt like jelly all at once. She needed to have him close as much as he needed to be close. But before she could surrender to the need to bury herself in her mate's arms, there was one other thing she had to do. I have to see Dorian. Go. Lucas stayed by the car, so Naya could see and hear him as he oversaw the retrieval operation. While Sasha had stopped her broadcast the instant there were enough people on scene to disarm and restrain the attackers, the mercenaries remained disoriented and shaky on their feet as they were thrown into Dark River vehicles for transport. Dorian, meanwhile, was seated in the very back of an SUV, the trunk door lifted to block out the sun while Jason patched him up. Tamsin had taken the young male on as an assistant after he showed an interest in studying medicine. He didn't have a changeling healing ability, but that didn't matter if he proved himself suited to be a medic. Another doctor in the pack would take the weight off Tamsin when it came to a number of injuries that didn't need her specialist attention. The interesting thing was that Jason showed no inclination to go roaming anytime soon. It was similar behavior to that of most healers. They loved being near pack too much. If they did travel, it was for short bursts only. Even though he doesn't have the healing ability, Tamsin had told Sasha, I think he's a healer at heart. He's just going to practice the drive a different way. His grades are more than good enough to get him into medical school. Calm and collected, the 21-year-old had stopped the blood flowing from Dorian's head wound. He hadn't, however, had the chance to wipe away the rust red that had already run down the side of Dorian's face. He was too busy checking the sentinel for broken bones and internal injuries using a handheld scanner. Dorian already had visible heavy bruising on one side of his face and no doubt his body. The colors were vivid against the surfer gold of his skin. And his white blonde hair. It was matted dark red on the side with the wound. Dorian. Close to tears, she touched her fingers to the undamaged side of the sentinel's face. Taking hold of her hand, he pressed a kiss to her palm. Infine, Saska darling. A little busted up, but that was those bastards in that fucking goddamn truck. You can't scare me. Sasha thought of the pulse she'd sent out, knew it must have been horrible. And still he'd fought his way out in an effort to protect her and Naya. Can I make it up to you? A curious look that was so feline, she didn't need his eyes to change to know she was talking to the cat now. Go for it. He gave a startled laugh as she blanketed him in a wave of innocent happiness that tasted of all the pups and cubs that Sasha knew. Damn, that's good shit. His grin was beautiful. You could make a fortune charging for a hit. Having satisfied himself the sentinel wasn't bleeding inside, Jason glanced up from taping Dorian's ankle. I want some. Sasha poured the same sensations over the younger male. Whoa. He grinned too, held up a hand. She high-fived it before looking guiltily back at Dorian. The sentinel crooked a finger, and when she leaned in close, he dropped a soft kiss on her lips. The affectionate touch of one of her favorite packmates. It told her he really was all right. I'm tough, he whispered. Go pet Lucas. He's freaked out. Still shaky inside, she left Dorian and Jason with another wave of childish joy. So pure and unfettered that it made both men collapse into laughter once more. Then she walked straight back into Lucas's arms. He held her trembling form until she could breathe again, at which point, she stroked her hands down the viciously taut muscles of his back. I'm unharmed and so is our daughter, she whispered in a subvocal tone, aware of the sharp little ears in the car. We're not easy prey. Damn straight you're not. A hard kiss, his claws brushing her hair and skin as he cupped her face with one hand. Come on, mate. Let's get our cub home. We have enough people here we can trust to keep us updated. Chapter 19. It was Clay who called them with that update, the leopard having taken charge of the scene after Lucas's departure. They'd reached the Eyrie in the interim. Leaving Naya busy with her play blocks, the two of them walked out onto the balcony to talk to Clay. Lucas answered the call on visual and put the sentinel on speaker at a volume Sasha could hear, but that wouldn't reach Naya. It's the same mercenary team the rats warned us about, Clay said. We confirmed their identity using various back channels courtesy of Nikita's tentacles. Sasha had already received a call from Max Shannon. He'd patched her through to Nikita, who'd wanted to see firsthand that Sasha and Naya were all right. Sasha had heard the ruthless tone in her mother's voice, known that had Nikita not been as weak as she was right now, she'd have ripped the truth from the mercenaries' minds. The fact that they'd have been drooling vegetables afterward wouldn't have bothered her in the least. How the fuck did they stay under this long? Lucas asked as Sasha's gut went cold. Perhaps she and her mother weren't that different after all. They're a crack team. They come in and set up, then don't move until the timing is perfect. Makes them almost impossible to catch if you don't get them the instant they enter. It sounds like they're talking. Fine tremor started to race once more over Sasha's skin. The last word of her statement broke. Lucas squeezed her nape. Remember, he murmured so low only she could hear. You did what you did to protect our cub. Those bastards would have taken her, hurt her. Sasha gave a jagged nod as on the phone Clay said, I got one of them to talk pretty damn fast by threatening him with what happened out on the road. An edge of amusement in the sentinel's voice. I would never torture anyone, Sasha blurted out, her stomach churning at the idea of it. I know that, Sasha, Clay said with unexpected gentleness. The assholes don't. His immediate agreement eased her sudden fear that her packmates would see her as a monster now that they knew what she could do. They were aware of DarkRiver's strength before they took the job, Clay continued. But the money on the table was enough to make up for the risk. They were totally focused on Dorian as the threat. Expected Sasha to be a soft target. Lucas's furious growl reverberated through her bones. Sigh. He snarled as she petted him to calm as he'd earlier done for her. For Sigh and 3 changelings, Clay replied. Lion if you can believe it. Not strong dominance or we'd never have gotten the truth out of them so quickly, but strong enough. Lion. Lucas shook his head. Seeing Sasha's confusion, he said, Lions are all about family, all about building a pride and sticking with it, more so than any other feline changelings in the world. Mercenary work is for loners. Kicker is that these 3 are family, Clay added. Brother and 2 sisters. The sentinel's voice turned harsh on his next words. They were hired to kidnap Naya. Sasha was disposable, but Naya was to be taken alive, or they wouldn't get the second half of their fee. Fury roared through Sasha, pushing aside any lingering echoes of guilt. She felt the same rage in Lucas. His grip threatened to crack the phone. Who was the client? All anonymous, with the drop-off to be arranged once they had Naya. Clay's eyes glittered hard and feral. But the lioness who's the leader of the mercenaries isn't stupid. She got her electronics person, her younger brother, to run a trace. Brother managed to link the first half of the money transfer back to a small company held by an ocelot pack out of southern Texas. Sky Elm. Sasha frowned, unable to imagine why a pack of the smaller feline changelings, whose markings were also black on gold, would want to attack DarkRiver. Beside her, Lucas's claws sliced out, But his voice was rational. We ever have any dealings with them? Mercy was with me the entire time. Clay tapped his ear to indicate how Mercy had attended the interrogation. She ran the data as I got it and says we've never had any real contact with this pack. From what she was able to dig up, they're well regarded in their region, though they're not the strongest by a long shot. And they're part of Trinity. Clay's voice took on the harsh edge of a growl. It makes no sense unless it's a setup or they're in the consortium too, Sasha completed softly, because changelings weren't a unanimous group by any measure. Each pack made up its own mind about any political alliances. Given how well the consortium had almost pulled off its earlier attempts to foment trouble between all three races, as well as their success in snatching Black Sea's most vulnerable swimmers, they undoubtedly had changeling members, advisors who were betraying their own people for power and profit. Rip the evidence apart, Lucas growled, then proved his mind remained icily clear despite his fury. There may be a deeper game in play. What? Clay swore the instant after he spoke. The consortium. Or hell, Ming Leben may be trying to enrage us enough to take out Skyelm. Why? To mess up Trinity, to make us the bad guys? Who the fuck knows? Use whoever you need to tear this down to the bones, and tap Nikita's intel system through Max. Lucas fisted his hand in Sasha's hair. We don't make any moves until we know for certain. Dark River is not about to be played by a bunch of power-hungry bastards. Part 2. Chapter 20. Sienna couldn't believe what Hawk had done. She simply couldn't believe it. She just returned to the Snowdancer den after lunch with Kit, and had intended to update Hawk on what the young soldier had told her about the mood of the city in the aftermath of Naya's attempted kidnapping the previous day. Kit had also shared some personal news in confidence, but he hadn't asked her to keep it from Hawk. People didn't expect mates to keep secrets from each other. And Sienna knew Hawk wouldn't say a word if she told him it couldn't go any further. In truth, she'd been planning to unload on him, because while she was happy for Kit, the leopard was one of her closest friends and she felt a selfish desire to tell him to delay things a little longer. Only her mate wasn't here for her to talk to. He'd left her a message on their private comm, inside their quarters. A message. I'm going to kill him, she muttered, stalking down the den corridor near the infirmary. I'm going to wring his alphaness's neck, then I'm going to kick his. She halted before she slammed into her Uncle Walker's chest. I have to go, she said, trying to swing around him. He stopped her by the simple expedient of putting a single hand on her upper arm. Sienna froze. She would never disrespect the man who was her father in every way that mattered. Uncle Walker, I need to leave, she said, her skin vibrating with her urgency. Hawk's gone out to confront Ming. It's a business meeting, Walker said. Sienna sucked in a breath. You knew. Betrayal was a slap across her face. Why didn't you tell me? Even though she was furious with Hawk, she could understand his boneheaded behavior. Her alpha mate was so protective of her that sometimes he acted before he thought. And when it came to Ming Leben, he was more feral wolf than civilized man. That didn't excuse what he'd done, but it at least made sense. But for her uncle to go along with it when he knew exactly how good Sienna was at taking care of herself? She stared uncomprehendingly at the planes of his face, his expression calm in the face of her rage. Hawk is incapable of thinking clearly with you anywhere near Ming. Walker held her gaze with the unusual light green of his. But you would have insisted on going with him. Of course I would have insisted. Sienna fisted her hands. Ming is a combat telepath. He could smash Hawk's natural shields open with far less effort than almost any other TP on the planet, kill him within seconds. Judd's with him. Relief and betrayal punched into her in equal measures. Him too, she demanded. Was I the only adult Lauren who wasn't informed of Hawk's plans? Walker closed both hands around her upper shoulders, held her still when she would have broken away. Hawk did this with a cool head, Sienna. The faintest hint of a smile. Cool enough to know it'd be better to ask for forgiveness than to convince you of the sense of his plan. Don't patronize me, Uncle Walker. It roared out of her. I'm not a child anymore. I'm his mate. Walker looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she started to want to fidget. But instead of wearing her down in that way only he could do, he inclined his head. Yes, he said. Hawk should have spoken to you. As for Judd and me, his expression shifted, revealing a tenderness that destroyed her. We can't help ourselves. You're a piece of our heart. All her anger crumbled. Falling into his arms, she let his warmth and love and strength surround her, ground her, her face pressed to the smoky blue of his shirt, her eyes hot. Walker had been the calm anchor in the ugly storm of her childhood after her mother died. The one person she'd known she could count on even when she was caught in a monster's grip. He was the one who'd made the Lorens into a family, refusing to let go no matter what. Never once had he betrayed her. "I'm sorry for yelling," she said when she could speak past the surge of emotion. "I'm just worried about Hawk." Cupping the back of her head, Walker said, "Can you sense any trouble through the mating bond?" She shook her head, the realization calming her enough that she could think past her worry and anger. Why is he even talking to Ming? Hawk hates him, wants to tear him into tiny pieces with his bare claws. "Let's walk outside. I'll tell you his reasoning. Whatever it is, I'm still going to strangle him when he gets back." Hawk knew he'd be heading straight into his mate's fiery temper when he returned to the den, but that didn't matter. Not when what he did here today would spell the start of the end of Ming Leben. Being in the same room as the former counselor and his cold metallic scent and not gutting the other man went against his natural instincts, but the wolf understood what it was to protect pups. And right now, hard as that was to swallow, Ming's stabilizing presence was protecting a heck of a lot of pups in Europe. That would change. If Hawk had to nudge Ming slowly out of power to make him viable prey, then so be it. The wolf was willing to listen to the human in this hunt, because both parts of him knew that sooner or later, Hawk would tear out Ming's throat. For threatening Sienna's life, for hurting her when she'd been a child, for all those Ming had tortured and murdered. As I noted in my message, Mr. Leben's Snowdancer has made a competing offer. The words were spoken by a slight human male seated behind the desk by the windows. Stenson was doing a good job of keeping his cool, but Hawk could smell the sour tang of nerves on the mustachioed man with pale white skin. It wasn't every day that a small computronics company fielded 2 buyout offers, one from an ex-counselor turned de facto ruler of a large chunk of Europe, the other from the biggest changeling pack in the country. Hawk, his back to the window, stood to the right of the desk. Sitting next to Ming in the spare guest chair on the other side of the desk wasn't an option. Judd stood outside the office door, but Hawk could sense him, knew the other man was protecting his mind from psychic threats. Whatever tricks Ming had, he'd have to mobilize into full battle mode to use them against an X-Arrow and an Alpha Wolf. Snowdancer isn't known for its interest in cutting-edge computronics. Hawk shrugged at Ming's frigid comment. Those who survive are those who adapt. I'll increase my offer by 10%. Stenson glanced at Hawk. We'll beat that, Hawk responded. By 1%. Ming made another counteroffer. Hawk countered it by another 1%. They went on like that until Ming got the point. Snowdancer was determined to buy this company and gain control of its innovative ideas. That Ming hadn't already stolen the company's secrets was thanks to some very clever structuring. Stenson was in charge of the company's finances and did the deals, but he knew nothing of its technological breakthroughs beyond what he needed to facilitate the financial side of things. The company had also succeeded in keeping secret the identities of its developers. No Psy could pluck out secrets from a mind if he or she didn't know which mind to target. It appears the company is yours. Ming left without further words. Hawk bared his teeth. When Stenson flinched, he realized the gesture had been more Lupin aggressiveness than human smile. Well, the man would have to get used to dealing with wolves sooner or later. Since Yuki and the rest of Snowdancer's legal eagles had already checked the details, Hawk finalized the deal with his signature, then held out his hand to Stenson. Happy to be working with you. The bewildered man shook his hand. You won't be restructuring? Expect a Snowdancer team to drop by, go over things with you. But at this stage, we plan to leave you to go about your business. Hawk had bought the company primarily to frustrate Ming and ensure the ex-counselor couldn't get a foothold in this part of the world. But it actually was a good investment. Now if you'll excuse me, I have another deal to complete. 5 minutes after that, he'd cut Ming off from acquiring the majority share in a financial entity based out of Liechtenstein, and an hour after that, while Judd drove them back up to the den, he made it clear to a corporation that they would lose their biggest client, Snowdancer, should they agree to work with Ming Leben. This was war and people had to choose sides. When he hung up, Judd raised an eyebrow. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were a ruthless CEO. I am a ruthless CEO. It was his official description on all the businesses that ran under the Snowdancer banner. You're the one who recommended we watch for Ming trying to infiltrate Snowdancer territory through business interests. It was why Hawk had known what Ming was up to. He'd had Snowdancer's Cooper and DarkRiver's Bastion arrange a network of eyes and ears in the region's business circles. I never expected you to take to business combat like a fish to water. It's not my preferred way to fight, a slight understatement, but it's nice to know I just cost Ming millions of dollars, cutting off a little more of the evil bastard's power base. How far will you go? All the way. As long as he played a strategic game, Snowdancer had the strength and the financial reach to not only keep Ming out of this territory, but to break the ex-counselor's grip on Europe. I should have figured it out earlier, but I was so set on tearing off his head that I didn't think about other options. Now that he had, Hawk was starting to enjoy the hunt. I'm going to bring him down so low that he has no allies and is running for his life on the streets. Then I'll tear off his head. Judd's eyes glinted. Losing power would be worse than death for Ming. Hawk showed his teeth again. Then the bastard's going to be in a lot of pain starting today. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from Cooper confirming that Snowdancer now owned a 10% share in a company Ming relied on for supplies for one of his other corporations. Give me 6 more months, Cooper had written, and we'll have a 51% share. The best part is that Snowdancer will make a profit long term even as we freeze out Lebanon. Hawk's wolf threw back its head inside him and howled in triumph. Letters to Nina. From the Private Diaries of Father Xavier Perez. March 28, 2074. Nina. I haven't written for many days. The Psy assassin and I have been in the mountains, laying a trail to disguise the path that leads to the hiding place of the villagers the other assassins are coming to murder. I thought we'd fight, spill blood, but this Psy, he tells me to be intelligent, to stop thinking with an alcohol-soaked brain and to remember that we are only 2 against an entire death squad. We can't win one-on-one, he says. We can win only by stealth and cunning and being smarter than the enemy. I've never fought this way in the shadows. Even when I ran with the human rebels in the first months after our village was sacked, we aimed to do violence against those who'd harm our people. Any rebels who died in the course of our campaign were held up as heroes. The Psy assassin doesn't know about the rebel cells. I'll never betray those men and women to a man who might turn on me without warning. But he said something to me that was eerily apt. Don't try to be a hero, Xavier. A dead hero can't help anyone. Chapter 21. Night had fallen by the time Hawk and Judd drove up the final track to the den. Impatience clawed at Hawk. Searching for something to take his mind off the hunger to see his mate, he said, "What time are you and Brenna heading to Cooper's territory?" He knew the two had plans to visit friends in the satellite den. Driving, right? Judd shook his head. We decided to catch a quick flight at 8 tomorrow, since our visit's only going to be a couple of days anyway. It'll give us more time on the ground. He brought the vehicle into the underground garage under the den. Good luck with Sienna. Unsaid were the words that he'd need it. Leaving the lieutenant to deal with the vehicle, Hawk jogged from the garage to his and Sienna's quarters. He was halfway there when he realized the mating bond was tugging him in the opposite direction. Reversing course, he ran out into the night darkness and through the trees for nearly 20 minutes until he saw her standing on a rise, looking out over the fields below. The moon was full tonight, her body outlined against a sky dotted with stars. It hit him again that she was his mate, extraordinary and strong and furious. Wincing at the look she shot him out of cardinal eyes gone a dangerous black, he braced himself. "Miss me," she growled before hauling him close for a kiss, her hands buried in his hair. It was a kiss of claiming, of branding, of angry welcome. Groaning, he had his hands on her hips, his body having turned rock hard in a single pulse, when she pushed him away. "If you ever do that to me again, I won't forgive you." He'd expected anger but not this brittle edge to her voice. "Walker was supposed to talk to you. Make sure you knew what was going on. My mate should have talked to me." The obsidian of her gaze flickered with a translucent flame, her tone flat. Hawk's gut twisted. This wasn't anger. It was deeper, harder. "You would have wanted to come, and there was no way in hell I was taking you." Even the idea of her anywhere near Ming made his wolf threaten to turn into a primal killing machine. "Look at this." Sienna held out a hand, on which danced a red and amber flame. "I'm not helpless. I'm the least helpless person in the world." Hawk thrust his hands into her hair, gripped. "But you're mine to protect." His heart pounded like a bass drum. "If anything happened to you." He couldn't say it, couldn't even think it. "I've lost too many people, baby. I can't lose you." When Sienna cupped his face, her hands were fierce and gentle both. "You won't. We're in this together." Her nails dug a little into his skin. "Trust me. Treat me as your mate." "Ido." Hawk's voice was turning more and more into a growl. "Why would you think otherwise? Why would you hide things from me?" Sienna yelled, her chest heaving. They stared at each other for a single endless heartbeat before their lips were locked in a kiss so passionate that Sienna went up in flames around them. He should have been worried, but he was never worried with the woman who fucking owned him. Her cold fire always knew Pac. And it definitely knew her mate. He took her to the ground, or maybe she took him. He tore off her clothes, she tore off his. Their naked bodies slid against one another, and when he pulled up her thigh and nudged at her with his cock, he found her wet and ready. Then she bit down on his lower lip while clawing his back, and it was all over. He thrust deep, pinning her to the earth. One stroke, too, and Sienna was clenching so tightly around him that he couldn't hold back. He gripped her shoulder with his teeth as he came, so hard that he knew he'd leave a mark. Good. He wanted her to wear his mark. Her nails made sure he'd be wearing hers. The fire flamed hot red, then wild amber around them. A dangerous kiss from his very dangerous mate. A mate who was still pissed off with him when the fire sank into the earth to leave them lying entangled and naked under the stars, neither one able to breathe properly for at least 5 minutes. Hawk could have dealt with an angry mate. He couldn't deal with the hurt he saw in her expression. Hand cradling the side of her face, he said, "I'm sorry." It was difficult for an alpha to say that, but never to his mate, never when he was fucking wrong. "I was trying to protect you, but I did that by hurting you. I'm so goddamn sorry." Sienna's eyes remained dark without stars, but she spread her hand over his heart. "I was so terrified for you." Hawk thought about how insane he'd go if he knew she was alone with Ming, and wanted to kick his own ass. "I took Judd," he said, even knowing that was no defense for what he'd done to her, the pain he'd inflicted. "But I was an asshole. I admit it. I won't do it again." Sienna's lips kicked up a little at the corners, the first stars appearing in her eyes. "I think this may go down in history," she said as relief punched him in the gut. "An unreserved apology from your alphaness. Smartass." He petted her as he spoke, apologizing with his touch as much as with his words. "Seriously, I was thinking with my heart, not my brain." "Ugh." Sienna pushed at his chest. "Stop making it hard to be mad at you." Her expression turned on the next breath. "You won't do it again? Leave me out of a decision that affects both of us." Tugging her to his chest as he rolled over onto his back, he brushed her hair off her face. "I promise." Sienna nodded. "Okay. I know you always keep your promises." The fist around his heart began to open. "Want to know why I went to the meeting?" When she nodded, he told her. Man and wolf both supremely smug when her expression showed admiration for his tactics. "I wouldn't have expected you to take Judd's idea and run with it like that," she said afterward, kicking up her feet. "You're fiercely intelligent, but you don't usually think sneaky." His wolf decided to take that as a compliment. "Sneaky is for cats," he growled. "But I have been spending a lot of time with Lucas lately. I guess some of it rubbed off." Sienna's smile was sharp. "I like the idea of messing with Ming's financial foundation." Her eyes narrowed in thought. "You know Devraj Santos hates him too?" Hawk nodded. He didn't have any real details on what Ming had done to Dev's wife, Katia, but he didn't need them, because what he did know was that she'd been kept captive by Ming Leben. Dev's hatred of Ming was something he'd picked up on the last time the Forgotten Leader had visited Snowdancer territory to catch up with the Forgotten Children embedded into Snowdancer, protected by being claimed as wolves to the outside world. Hawk had said something about Ming that involved Ming being dead, and Dev had agreed, his voice holding a near-metallic chill that was almost sigh. Except for the fury behind it, the rage Hawk could all but taste. Katia shot him in the head. The fucker survived. Running a hand down the sexy curve of his mate's back as the memory of Dev's angry words echoed through his mind, he said, "Arrows have to hate him too." That would have been easy enough to guess with the defection of the squad from under Ming's leadership, even without Judd's close connection to current active duty arrows. Sienna tapped her kiss-swollen lower lip with a finger. "Snowdancer can blindside Ming a few times, but eventually he's going to figure out all our major business entities, and start to avoid anything where we could have an impact." Hawk bared his teeth. That's satisfying on its own. It would mean the pack was forcing Ming to make financial decisions that weren't in his best interest. Yes, but if we get a few other people involved. Hawk wasn't used to playing with people outside his pack. And okay, Lucas, since the cat had proven his loyalty to the blood bond between the two packs. But he could see the positives of Sienna's idea. Enough people in on this and it'll become very difficult for Ming to predict who might have an interest in what, or who might develop an interest. Sienna nodded. "Dev has financial expertise, but I'm not sure about the arrows. I know Judd didn't get any financial training as an arrow. He learned what he did on his own. We don't want to put anyone in a bad position." Hawk nipped at her lips just because, growled when she dug her nails into him in response. It wasn't a complaint. "This is only fun if everyone but Ming comes out a winner," he agreed. "I'll ask Judd to check whether the arrows have someone with financial smarts. We have people we can lend them if they don't." He ran one hand through the dark ruby fire of Sienna's hair. Yes, his wolf thought this is better. Working with my mate, coming up with ideas together. Smiling at him, she ran a finger down his nose. "I feel your wolf prowling in there." You want to run? I have to do a sweep anyway. Yes. The wolf wanted her fingers in its fur, wanted to nip at her with its teeth, play with her under the moonlight. Pushing off him, Sienna held out a hand. He took his time rising, enjoying the sight of her nude body kissed by the moonlight and clothed only in the beautiful hair he loved to play with in either form. Her smile, though, that was the most beautiful part of her. He kept that image in his mind as he shifted, the wrenching pain and stunning ecstasy of the shift rippling through him as his body exploded into millions of particles of light, then reformed in another shape. It was still him. Always. In either form. He shook his body to settle his fur into place, discovered his mate was pulling on her jeans. Picking up her t-shirt while her back was turned, he started to pat away. Hawk! Her outraged cry came a second later. Give that back. Huffing in laughter, he upped his pace. An infuriated scream echoed on the air currents, but Sienna didn't come after him. When he glanced back, he saw her pulling on his shirt, which happened to be torn down one side thanks to her angry, impatient hands earlier. Using the torn halves, she tied the shirt off at the side of her abdomen, then smirked at him and picked up his jeans. Guess you don't need these, she said before balling them up and throwing them over the side of the rise. Dropping her t-shirt, he loped back to her and without warning nipped her butt. She yelped, clamped a hand over the part he'd bitten, turned to look at him with temper in her eyes. You are in trouble. Fire arced a half-centimeter from his nose. Making a sound more common to a startled pup than a tough-as-nails alpha, he jumped back. To hear his mate laughing so hard she could barely take a breath. When he growled again, she just laughed harder. And then she was on her knees and her hands were in his fur, and she was pressing her face to his while the jeweled dark red of her hair fell around him and life was perfect. Hawk kept Sienna company all night on her security shift. After their run through the area assigned to her, she told him about her lunch with Kit, the baby cat alpha she insisted on having as a friend. Stop growling. She glared at him from her standing watch position. He was sitting in wolf form beside her, his fur rippling in the breeze. He growled again just to rile her up. Eyes glinting, she pointed at him. I think you've been hanging around cats too much. You're getting sly. This time his growl was one of insult. Her lips twitched. Got you. Coming down on one knee to run her hand through the silver gold of his fur, while still keeping an eye on her watch area, she said. City's angry but calm. Word's gotten around about how quickly the attempted kidnapping was defused, and that's helping turn aggression into pride. Hawk nodded. Strange as it was for a changeling to accept, the humans in the city felt a certain ownership in DarkRiver in the sense that it was their pack that held such power. That extended to Snowdancer in the regions where the wolves held sway. The oddest thing was that a number of local Psi seemed to believe the same, feeling more loyalty toward the packs than they did toward the ruling coalition. It wasn't something either Hawk or Lucas had expected or were used to, but as alphas they saw the pragmatic benefits. And as two men born with powerful protective drives, they refused to let down the people who'd given them their trust, even if those people weren't pack. That too was a situation Hawk could have never predicted. Changeling alphas didn't run for mayor or for any other political office for good reason. Their primary and primal focus was the pack. The latter would never change, but the line of communication between the packs and the other residents of their territories was stronger and more in use than it had ever before been. A threat to any part of that territory was considered a threat to the packs, and as such their actions protected all who called it home. There's no more news yet on exactly who was behind the mercenaries, Sienna added. At least not as far as Kit knows. Rising to her feet again, she began to walk the perimeter. He walked beside her. Layla Savia remains missing. Sienna's tone turned somber. It's going to take a miracle to find her, isn't it? Her eyes met his, the sorrow in them potent. She too had once been trapped in a nightmare. Hawk wished he could tell her that they would find the vanished Black Sea changeling. But Sienna didn't want empty comfort, had experienced too much harsh reality to accept it. Instead of giving her words that meant nothing, he held her gaze until she nodded, understanding his promise. No one would stop looking for Layla Savia until they either found her, or her body. If for some unfathomable reason others stopped, Snowdancer would pick up the baton. Together they began to walk again. Times they talked, but mostly they just enjoyed being together. As night turned to the gray before dawn, Ty came to relieve Sienna. The young soldier with his big shoulders and slightly slanted eyes of blue-green grinned a hello at Hawk, but he had the good sense not to attempt to tease his alpha about being out all night with his mate. Hawk wasn't above teasing, but Ty was too young to have earned the right to that much informality. Sienna had always been the single exception to that rule. From the day she'd entered the den, She'd seemed to make it her mission to drive Hawk insane. He should have known then and there that she was destined to be his mate. Why are you smiling? Still in wolf form, he glanced up at her question. It doesn't matter what form you wear. I know. An answer to his unspoken question. I can feel it inside. She touched a fist to her heart. Something's amusing you. He bolted into a run without warning, challenging her to keep up with him. Laughing, she pounded toward the den alongside him. They both knew he was throttling his speed for her, but that took none of the pleasure out of it. His wolf loved running with her. Racing through the dew-laden quiet of the white zone, they pelted into the den and past startled packmates who jumped out of the way. One yelled out, "Act your age, not your shoe size." Another growled, "Dignity, Hawk?" Both of those hecklers were his friends, their words tinged with laughter as well as joy that Hawk had found a mate, found happiness. Continuing to race through the corridors that were quiet except for the early risers, they tumbled into their quarters together and Sienna locked the door behind them. Hawk shifted in the seconds it took her to do that. Scooping her up in his arms the next instant, he ran into the bedroom to throw her on the bed. Her hair haloed around her in a ruby-red fan. Her face flushed from their run and her breathing rough. That was fun. Coming down over her, he took a morning kiss, his wolf rumbling inside his chest. I was smiling because I was thinking about what a pain in the butt you were as a teenager. You liked me even then. She poked at his shoulder. Admit it. Never. He grinned and pushed off the bed before her wandering hands made it impossible for him to do anything but strip her naked, make her sigh his name. You need to eat and then you need to sleep. A scowl. You going to sleep with me? Hawk was fully capable of going without sleep, but since Snowdancer wasn't at any kind of emergency alert, he didn't need to. Yes, Sienna Lauren Snow, he said, drawing out her name because he liked the way it sounded. I'll be sleeping with you. She sat up and reached back to quickly braid her hair. Good. Let's go get breakfast. Hawk had recovered the jeans Sienna had thrown over the rise, but had left them, and her t-shirt, cached for later retrieval. Grabbing another pair, he hauled them on, then shrugged into an old black tee before taking her hand. In sync, with no more need for any further discussion, they made their way together to the room where breakfast was laid out for those packmates coming off night shift or going out on an early morning shift. Scene. Sienna's best friend, Evie, waved them over to a table where she sat alone, nursing a cup of coffee. Hoka. Good morning. Bending, he pressed a kiss to her temple, her hair cool black silk under his touch and her eyes deepest gray. It was extraordinary how differently he saw Evie and Sienna, though they were near the same age. Indigo's submissive sister was so young in the life she'd lived, so innocent. The alpha in him felt only protectiveness when he looked at Evie, could never imagine seeing her as a woman. Sienna. Wolf and man, he'd always accepted her as a strong opponent, even when she'd been too young for him to see her as anything else. What are you doing up? Sienna asked her friend as Evie rose to pour Sienna and Hawk coffee from the carafe on the counter. Hawk accepted the small gift with a smile of thanks. Had he insisted on getting his own coffee, she'd have lost that sunny light in her eyes, started to feel redundant. She wasn't. No submissive was. Dominants were the fighters of a pack. Submissives took care of creating the home they protected. It was a perfect balance in a healthy pack. I had breakfast with Ty. Evie's cheeks flushed with happiness. He told me he was taking over from you, so I thought I'd wait. Hawk had just accepted a hot bacon roll Evie passed over from the tray that must have been brought in a bare minute earlier, when his attention was caught by another woman who'd walked into the otherwise empty room. Alice Eldridge, a gifted human researcher who'd been forcibly put into cryonic sleep for over 100 years, and had woken to find everyone she'd ever known was dead. Her hair had grown back in the ensuing time, the spiral curls rich brown and gold against brown skin that had regained its glow. Her body, too, was no longer skin and bones. She'd taken up climbing again, regained the lithe muscle tone she'd had before her long sleep. But Alice's eyes continued to hold a relentless sadness. Unable to see a member of his pack that way, Hawk put down his roll and, leaving Sienna chatting to Evie, walked over to Alice. She hadn't yet accepted that she was a snowdancer, wasn't sure what her place was in the world, but she was still his responsibility. Not saying a word, he wrapped his arms gently around her, loosely enough that she could escape should she want. She froze like a startled deer. 1 second. 2. 3. A cautious movement. Alice placed her head against his chest and slid her arms around him. He tightened his embrace. All changelings knew that sometimes touch could heal what words never could. Thank you, she whispered afterward. Why does that make me feel safe? You're a stranger, really? Because even a human recognized the power in an alpha wolf. You're one of mine, Hawk told her. Part of this family. Don't forget that. A shaky smile before Alice nodded and joined the rest of them for breakfast. Smiling, Evie got her tea and a roll before whispering, I heard a rumor that a certain dominant is going to ask you out today. Alice groaned, her lingering sadness fading, at least for now, under a wave of aggravation. Exactly as Evie had likely intended, even if it hadn't been a conscious thought on her part. Submissives were good at that, at giving others what they needed to get back on an even keel. What is it with wolves? Alice said with a feminine snarl of which Hawk's wolf approved. I've made it crystal clear that I'm not anywhere near ready to date. Swallowing a bite of her own roll, Sienna shook her head. You say that and certain wolves here. Oh, she wants me to try harder. Hawk wisely kept his mouth shut and started on a second roll, having already demolished the first. Evie got up to refresh his coffee, but her attention was on the conversation. So I should just go on a date and be awful? Alice asked. Bore the man to tears by talking about esoteric research papers on bat guano, or the health properties of wheatgrass? Her eyes gleamed. It holds a certain appeal. Shaking her head, Evie said, No, because then all the others will think they can do a better job and it'll become a contest to see who can make you have a good time on a date. Yeah. Sienna nodded. Also, if the male in question makes a real effort on the date, he might get his feelings hurt and then you'll have to figure out how to deal with a moping wolf. Alice stared at Hawk's mate. While the fact I'm turning the men down flat isn't hurting anyone's feelings? Both Sienna and Evie shook their heads, with Evie the one who explained. Wolves love a good chase. I mean, did you hear what Drew did while he was courting my sister? The resulting conversation actually had Alice laughing. No, he didn't, she said several times, only to be met by confirmations that yes, Drew did go there and yes, he did do that. Content to be around his mate and packmates, Hawk just grinned and listened. As a result of their lingering over breakfast, he was awake when a call came through that Indigo thought he should answer. He'd just been about to strip for bed, had his t-shirt balled up in one hand. Cy called Pax Marshal, his lieutenant said over the comm. He's got a proposal and I figured you'd want to take his measure. She was right, Pax Marshal wasn't simply another CEO. He was a ruthless male who'd risen to the top of his family hierarchy at only 24 years of age and, according to Judd's intel, was considered one of the new powers in the net. Whether he has any loyalty to anyone but himself is up for question. But if he doesn't have blood on his hands, I'd be very surprised. Judd's words fresh in his mind, Hawk pulled his t-shirt back on and said, Transfer Marshal through.